jellyfish. You never come back the same way you went. Every time we look at you, there's different jellyfish.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Good evening. Welcome everybody to our gathering this evening to discuss the matter of disaffiliation. Our guest speaker tonight is our district superintendent, the Reverend Tony Vinson, and he is, just for the records, going to be talking on the, if you remember the old 60 minutes point counterpoint, he's going to be talking about remaining in the UMC. Same bat time, same bat channel next week. So Wednesday the 21st at 6:30 will be Chap Temple here to talk about the GMC. And then following that, we can see what everybody wants to do. The format's going to be pretty simple. Tony's going to give his presentation, and then he will open it for questions. This is a hybrid meeting. We're doing it both in person, and I'm glad we have so many people here tonight. That is great. But we're also doing it on Zoom. So when it does come time for questions, unfortunately, we do not have the technology to let people ask questions directly off of Zoom. So they will have to ask via computer, and I'll ask the question for Tony at that time. So we will be having questions from you all, questions from the wider congregation on the stream, and this is also being recorded. So if somebody wants to look at it later, we will upload it like we do our worship services, so that it is available for later reference if you want. I do ask that if you do ask a question, you don't have to come to one of these microphones, but I do need you to speak up. These are very sensitive microphones that I have turned on, but we want to make sure that people who are at home hear your questions as well as we hear their questions when I repeat it to them. So, pretty, yes, ma'am.
Is your microphone on?
Yes, ma'am. It is. You're not hearing me?
No.
Oh, well, I'll turn my mic up some more. It is on. Yeah, I'll turn it up. Usually people want me to turn my mic down, but it is on. And like I said, these will be up. So I would ask that you silence your phones, if you don't mind, so we don't get lots of amusing ringtones over the course of this. And again, ask your questions. And I will say, for those of you who are wondering why we're doing it on separate nights, it simply was not possible to get a point and counterpoint balanced presentation on the same night, and I do appreciate both Chap and Tony making the trip down, and Tony bought dinner, so that's even better. We'll see if Chap buys dinner next week or not, but that's a good thing. So let's begin in prayer, and then I'm going to go back and handle the tech that normally we would be counting on Charlie to do, and hopefully this will all work. And again, thank you for being here. Let us pray. Come, Holy Spirit, enlighten our hearts, inspire our souls, clear our minds, and help us discern your will and your way in this and in all things and all places. In the name of our Lord Jesus, we pray. Amen.
Well, good evening. It's great to be with you. It's been a while since I've been down here, actually. It's been probably since pre-COVID. It's been a couple of years, but it's great to see all of you here, and I'm honored to be a part of this presentation tonight. Before I really get into a whole lot, I think I need to spend a little bit of time just introducing myself and my own spiritual journey, just so you know where I'm coming from, even before I get into the subject matter. My mother was a good, God-fearing Roman Catholic girl, grew up in New Orleans. She married my dad. They eloped. He was in the Air Force. He was coming through New Orleans and scooped her up, and within 6 weeks, they were married by justice of the peace. They were not married in the Catholic Church, and that put her sort of out of communion. I have two older brothers and myself and a younger sister who came along. And by the time all of our kids were born, I could hear my grandmother saying to my mom, "Now, Teresa, you got to get those babies baptized because God forbid." You see, Catholics believe in original sin. And they believe that you need to get babies baptized right away so that in case something bad happens, they didn't, go to hell or something. So she was desperate to get the babies baptized, and the Catholic Church wouldn't do it. My dad was not going to join the Catholic Church. Actually, my dad didn't want to join any church. And so the only sucker she could find was a Methodist preacher who was willing to baptize all the babies. And she did. And we kind of grew up not going to church very much. By the time I reached about 12 years old, she decided I needed to go to confirmation. And I went to confirmation. I went to the Boy Scout troop that was sponsored in the little Methodist church where our membership rested, where we attended maybe 3 or 4 times a year. I remember going through my God and Country award as a Boy Scout and having to participate in worship one Sunday morning. And they asked me to read the scripture, which I did. And I remember a dear old saintly man saying at the end of the service, "You did that quite well, young man. Have you thought about being a preacher?" And I thought, if he only knew the scoundrel he was talking to, he wouldn't have said that. I'm a sinner. And my dad hated preachers and hated church. Whenever we did go to church, the only thing he could say after the service is, "All that preacher ever talks about is money." And all the preacher might have just said is, "Let us now take up the offering." But that's what he heard. And that's what upset him so much, that he talked about money. And he just didn't ever want to go. When I was in high school, I had some young people, classmates, who invited me to church. I was about to be a senior in high school. They invited me to go on a choir tour with them. I was singing in the choir at my high school. And while I was on that choir tour, I encountered Jesus. I let Jesus into my heart. It changed my life forever. Within about 6 months, I decided I wanted to go into the ministry. By the time I had graduated from high school, I wanted to start in the ministry right then. And I got a job as a youth director in 1970. That was the year I graduated from high school. In the summer of 1970, as a church youth director, I wasn't even in college yet. I would no more hire a youth director at 18 years old today, but I was, and they did. And they asked me back even for a second summer. And then my own home church asked me to work as a youth director while I was working my way through college. And the college that I went to was Texas Wesleyan College, a wonderful Methodist school in Fort Worth. And they gave me scholarships because I was going into the Methodist ministry. And then I went on to actually Bright Divinity School at TCU. But I got Methodist scholarships. And I have been in the ministry all these many years. I was ordained in 1979. That means that this next conference year I will have been an ordained pastor for 44 years. I worked in churches as a youth director for about 9 years prior to that. So I've been at church business work for well over 50 plus years, right? I'm 71 in a couple of weeks. And I have 44 years of service, and I'm going to retire next annual conference at June. And I will have finished as a district superintendent for 7 years. When I was in 1979, when I was ordained, I was a campus minister at a little junior college in Athens, Texas. And while I was there, I and 2 friends helped start a ministry called UMC. I don't know if you've ever heard of UMC. But over the years, when I've heard young people tell me that I went on a UMC trip and that's when I found Jesus, or I went on a UMC trip and that's when I had a call to the ministry, I always say a quiet prayer of gratitude in my heart that God would have used me in those moments to be a part of something that was so significant to make a difference in so many different people's lives. I also went to the Walk to Emmaus in the late 80s. And when I was moved to a church in East Texas, they didn't have an Emmaus community up there. And I was a charter spiritual director to help get Emmaus started. Likewise, I hear people talking to me how Emmaus has made a difference in their life and in their walk with Christ. I love Christ. I love Jesus. I believe in the Bible. I believe in the divinity of Christ. I believe I am saved because of the grace of God in Jesus Christ. I believe in the resurrection. And I believe in the Bible as a scriptural authority for my life. There are times that I don't do such a good job of living up to everything the Bible wants of me. I'm a sinner. But by the grace of God, I ask for forgiveness, and I keep asking God to make me more holy and to sanctify me and to help me become the person that God wants me to be. I pray the prayer of the psalmist almost daily. Search me and try me, O God, and see if there be any wicked way within me. And in another psalm, create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. I love the Lord. I want people to know the redeeming love of God in Jesus Christ. And I want the whole world to know it. And I want the churches, every church in the Southwest District, in the United Methodist Church, to be bold in their proclamation of the gospel. Some churches do that pretty well. Some churches not so much. But I do believe that that's what we're all called to do and be as a church, is to be here to make disciples for Jesus Christ and to reach a hurting and broken world with the gospel, with the good news of God's great love in Jesus Christ. That's who I am, and that's what I'm about. And I have done that for 44 years plus in the United Methodist Church. And when I retire next June, I intend to retire as a United Methodist minister. And beyond my retirement, I will continue to work for the Lord in the United Methodist Church. I'm going to go through some training to be what they call an interim minister, an intentional interim minister, when helping churches. Our conference does this wonderful thing when churches are in between pastors. Sometimes a pastor goes on a sabbatical. Sometimes they get sick. Sometimes they die. Sometimes they leave the ministry. And we need someone to go in kind of like as a substitute teacher and be the pastor for a month or 2 or 3. Our conference pays for that and helps churches have a pastor until a new pastor can be found and assigned to them. And so I plan on going through that training. And I'm also a training as a coach, so I can coach and train other pastors. I'm going to do that in the United Methodist Church because this is the church that has nurtured me and cradled me, the church where I have discovered the love of God in Jesus Christ, where I have grown in my faith, and where I found a place of witness and ministry and service. And I'm proud to be a part of this church. So before I say anything else, you need to know that's where I'm coming from, and that's who I am. I'm not standing before you because I'm paid to say it. I don't get a commission for how many churches we can keep in the United Methodist Church, versus losing to the Global Methodist or anything like that. As a matter of fact, let me just say right up front, I have a lot of pastor friends that I've been in ministry with for the last 40 plus years. Some of them are going into the Global Methodist Church. I love them. They're my brothers and sisters in Christ. Those churches are also working hard to promote the gospel. And I'll also say this. I have a brother who is a deacon in the Baptist church. He will be quick to say, we're not Southern Baptists, we're Independent Baptists. And he's a deacon. And he believes that I wasn't baptized correctly. I think he doubts my salvation. Right? No, he doesn't anymore. He's gotten over it. But he did for a while. But we sometimes disagree a lot. He doesn't think that women ought to be preachers. He doesn't think we ought to baptize babies. There's just a whole lot of things we disagree on. But he's my brother, and I love him. And there's not a day that goes by there are days that go by. Every opportunity I have to call him, and that's pretty regular, we'd never fail to say to one another how much we love one another. even though we're in different denominations, and even though we believe different things, we still love and respect one another. And my prayer for all of the churches who are in discernment right now is that regardless of the decision you make as a church, my prayer is that you all will continue to love one another and continue to serve Christ faithfully in the future. And you won't let this vote and the outcome of this vote divide you as a congregation or weaken your witness in Brazoria. My prayer is that you will remain faithful to the calling of Christ regardless of the outcome of the vote. If I did not believe that you could be faithful to Christ in the United Methodist Church as well as the Global Methodist Church, I wouldn't be remaining a United Methodist pastor. But I believe you can be. And I've not only invested my entire life to that, but I believe it with all my soul. I'm not going to say bad things about the Global Methodist Church tonight, but I will occasionally point out some differences that you need to be thinking about when you're going through this discernment. Now, there's some other reasons why I've chosen to remain a United Methodist, besides the fact that it is the place where I have been birthed in my spiritual journey, where I discovered Christ, where I still grow with Christ, and it's the place that feeds me. Besides those things, there are some other aspects of our polity, and that is to say our organization and our connection and our denomination that are unique, and in some cases even unique to the Global Methodist Church, that I personally prefer over the other organizational structures. I like our strong connection. We live in a day when people have mixed reactions to anything that looks like a bureaucracy or that looks like an unwieldy kind of institution. There's actually a kind of surveys are taken that there's a general distrust of most institutions in America today. And I'm not just talking about the church. Now, believe it or not, in the secular world out there, beyond these walls, there are a whole lot of people in Brazoria, Texas, who don't care squat about this decision. They don't care about the church. They're not even connected to a church. And they don't care about this argument. They don't understand it, and they don't like the church. And no matter what decision you make, they're probably not going to come here. I mean, that's just the truth. There's just a lot of people. Just look around this neighborhood. As I drove in, I drove by all kinds of houses. They're not coming over here. This may look pretty much like the crowd on Sunday mornings. It's not a full house. So one thing I want to ask all of you is, if you were to change the denominational sign, name on the outside of this building to the Global Methodist Church or any other denomination, what do you think you would be doing differently that you're not doing right now that would help you reach more people with the gospel of Christ? How would you be living differently? What would motivate you to be more invitational and aggressive in bringing new people into this congregation? Will changing the name outside of your denominational allegiance make that kind of difference in you to get you to being the church that's growing and vibrant again? Will that make a difference? And if so, I have to ask, what prevents you from doing those very same things right now as a United Methodist? What is keeping you from sharing the gospel by inviting strangers to come to church with you? So for me, the purpose of the church is to make disciples for Jesus Christ. And we can do that as United Methodists, and we can do that as Global Methodist Church, and we can do that as Baptists, and we can do that as Lutheran and as Church of Christ, and all are part of the body of Christ. But right now, we're United Methodists. What would be different if you were to change the name? That's a question that only you can answer. I think that there's a strength in our connectional system over even the Global Methodist Church. You may not think that over the years, the bishop or the district superintendent has always given you the best pastor. You might think we've given you a great pastor right now, but over the years, there may have been times when you have felt, oh, we've gotten the short end of the stick on this one or something. I don't know. Nobody said that to me. I'm just saying that some smaller churches don't like the fact that they don't get a lot of say in who the pastor will be. In the Global Methodist Church, you will have a whole lot of say in choosing and hiring your pastor. As a matter of fact, there will not be a district superintendent. There will be a bishop, but the equivalent to the district superintendent is called a presiding elder and in the Global Methodist Church. And if you have an opening, and if there are pastors who are willing to come to a church like Brazoria, that presiding elder, who could be a pastor at another church, they won't be a full-time district superintendent, they'll provide you a list and help you a little bit in interviewing these persons and deciding who you want to hire. So the local church will have more ability to decide who they will get as their pastors. No offense, but good luck. Good luck. And first of all, there's no pool of pastors who are trained in the Global Methodist Church that are waiting and looking for an appointment. When they begin their new denomination, they will not have a group of pastors who have been in the denomination, who have been developed, who have grown, who have been called into the ministry and are ready to find an assignment. And in our system, where we have a guaranteed appointment and minimum salary standards, it's easier for us to appoint a pastor and say, you go to Brazoria and you preach the gospel to those people. And for that person who has agreed to be under appointment by the bishop to go, they're guaranteed a job, they have a ministry to perform. It's our responsibility to provide you with those pastors. You don't have that in the Global Methodist Church. And for many small churches across our conference, they will be vulnerable at not having a pastor at all for a significant period of time. I'm just saying. One of the strengths of the United Methodist Church is our appointment system that will send a pastor to come and serve a church like Brazoria. So that's one of the strengths. I just mentioned earlier also, now I will say, I'm just going to admit this right up front. It appears that the Global Methodist Church will have apportionments, and they'll probably be less than the apportionments that you're paying now. Okay, so there could be a little bit of cost savings. I don't know how much for Brazoria. I don't know how much your calculated apportionment will be. I'm not a Global Methodist representative, and it's not mine to say, and I couldn't guess if I wanted to. But you might have a little bit of cost savings, but you would not have some of the things that the Methodist Church provides. Your apportionments pay for, like a full-time district superintendent, like what I just mentioned earlier, intentional interim ministries, like equitable salaries, like conference staff to provide incentives. Right now we have a program to help innovative ideas, and we offer grants within our denomination for churches that are trying to think of new ideas. You don't have those kind of connectional resources available in a brand new denomination that you have right now established in the United Methodist Church. They do not have a pool from which to draw for scholarships to train new pastors. Like, the Methodist Church is at its best when we identify, support, develop, train, and deploy pastors. That system is not in place in a more independent, autonomous, congregational kind of polity like the Global Methodist Church will be. So I think there's a strength in our denominational system. Now, I don't know how it is in the local Baptist church here in town, but I remember when I was serving a church in Giddings, Texas. And I had a lot of good friends there. I served there for 5 years. I was in the Lions Club, and there were some members of the Lions Club who were Baptists, and they said, man, I love you, and I like going to your church, and I love hearing you preach. But the problem with the Methodist church is they're going to move you. And if I were to join, you're going to be gone. But in the time that I was there, in those 5 years, the Baptist church went through 3 different pastors. And in between each of those pastors, some of them they fired, they went months without any pastor at all. So, because they were out there scrambling to find a pastor to come serve them. And so, just think about that. I am proud to be United Methodist because of our institutional legacies. What I'm talking about is the ways in which we've started great hospital systems like the Methodist hospital system, great universities and educational system. I was a beneficiary of Texas Wesleyan University, a small 4-year school. We have 5 United Methodist related, historically related colleges in Texas, plus SMU and the seminary there. I'm proud of ministries like the Wesley Community Center, which is a unique, independent, inner city ministry that is helping with underserved children and collect some of the resources to do this incredibly great ministry that's taking place in the city of Houston. And I'm proud of our camp, Lakeview, that was started by United Methodist and the differences it has made in people, that institutional legacy. Now, admittedly, over the last 10 to 15 years, partly because of exposure to litigation and other things, many of these institutions have begun to no longer be, they acknowledge their Methodist roots, but they have become more independent from the denomination. So what happened was, in California, there was a group of nursing homes that were being sued. I don't remember the reason, but lack of good care or something. Some families were suing, and they were Methodist nursing homes. And the lawyers wanted to sue the entire denomination. And so most institutions, whether they're nursing homes or hospitals or universities or even our camp, have now sort of taken one step back and have had their own boards and are no longer directly United Methodist. But their historical legacy is that the United Methodist Church started them, and they have a Methodist identity. Okay, so I'm proud of that. I said earlier that I believe in Jesus, and I believe in the Bible. I believe in the resurrection. I believe in the divinity of Christ. And that will never, ever have to change in the United Methodist Church. There will be some people who will tell you that they believe that there's some changes are going to happen in the Methodist Church's theology sometime in the future. But I'm here to tell you and to promise you that our doctrines and our articles of religion will never, ever change. And that there will always be a place in the United Methodist Church for Bible-believing, gospel-preaching pastors and congregations who hold to those values. And if you hold to those values like I do, I can stand here and assure you that you will always be able to hear the gospel preached in this place. And you will always hear the Bible preached. Now, having said that, let me just say, I've been in the ministry for 44 years. I've always known that there are preachers all over this nation of ours who have different ideas than I do. I have always known that there are some preachers that I've heard had wild ideas that I could think are heretical. That, how do they get away with that? That I've disagreed with. And they've been a part of our denomination, right? I question whether or not they're very effective in the local church. In the Texas Annual Conference, if we had a preacher who was preaching against the divinity of Christ, they wouldn't last very long. Your church wouldn't tolerate it. The bishop wouldn't tolerate it. And they would not be very effective. And there would not be a place for them to serve. We work really hard when we make appointments to make sure that we make appointments and pastors that are in alignment with the church's theology and culture, that can understand and relate to the culture of the church and to share in some of the values that you share. Now, there are times that we may not get it perfect. People are sinners, and so are preachers. And sometimes they make mistakes. And that's when we step in to try to fix those mistakes as soon as we possibly can. But at least you have somebody stepping in to fix that mistake when you have the United Methodist Church's polity. I love the theology of grace that we emphasize and forgiveness. While there is great diversity in theology and practice across the nation, I'm grateful that we can still be of one denomination to continue having these difficult conversations. The truth of the matter is, even among my colleagues, other pastors, sometimes we have deep conversations that are hard conversations, and we find that there are disagreements about our understanding of the Bible and our theology. But I don't know how it is for you, but I'll tell you how it is for me. I am grateful when I encounter someone who has different ideas than my own. Sometimes it helps sharpen my own thinking. Sometimes it even deepens my own convictions because I have thought through what I've believed. I've heard somebody say something different, and I've had to sort of evaluate. Do I really believe this? Well, yes, I do, and here's why. And it's helped me grow and deepen my understanding that I already had. But sometimes I may learn new things that I hadn't thought of before. And my understanding may grow and expand. And I'm all about growing in grace and growing in sanctification. And so different ideas don't bother me. There will be some people who will say that one reason why the Global Methodist Church has been formed is because they're tired and frustrated that certain issues, usually around human sexuality, keep coming up every 4 years when the discipline is being evaluated. It seems like we settle that issue, and here it comes again. We settle that issue, and here it comes again. Our book of discipline still says that homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching, and it has for the last 25, 30 years. It has for the last 25 or 30 years. It hasn't always been in there, but I don't know, about 25 or 30 years ago it was inserted, and it's remained. And every year somebody tries to get it changed, and they failed. Not every year, every 4 years, every time we have a general conference.
Tony?
Yes.
Just a comment. I believe it went in 50 years ago. I believe it went in 1972. So
all right, thank you. 50 years ago. He's probably more right than I am.
Why do we still have gay preachers? That's the main thing.
Do you know any gay preachers,
Sorry?
Roger? Do you know any gay preachers?
In the thing where I forgot where it was that they was up there doing it, I personally do not know any gay
Yeah.
preachers.
Yeah,
Why do they do?
Okay, let me just say, if we have any gay preachers in the Texas Annual Conference, I am not aware of them. Okay, I am aware that there is a bishop that has been elected in California that was married to a woman that was married to another woman. There was a judicial council decision that said that that was illegal, and the people in the western jurisdiction in California ignored it. That, too, is a point of great frustration for the people in the WCA and the Global Methodist Church. The inability to hold another jurisdiction, like in California, accountable to the book of discipline. They are in disobedience We are not. And our inability to fire them or to cut them off has frustrated some people. But the truth is, this is my perspective, what they do in California doesn't have to impact me here in Texas one bit.
Oh, it does.
Well, go ahead, Roger.
All right.
Go
But
ahead.
it does, like me, for instance, I'm going to use me as an example. I'm not talking about anybody else, I'm just talking about me. I've been grown up in this church as a Methodist all my life. This is my hometown, this is my church. But whenever he starts talking about the doctrine changing, that gays could become preachers, talking about gays doing this, that,
I understand. And I'm saying the book of discipline has not changed, and it has remained the same. And nothing has changed in the book of discipline. Some fear that it might change in the future. Now, to me, that's a fear tactic because nobody can tell you what's going to happen in the future. And I'm not going to make my decision today based on fear because I believe that perfect love casts out all fear. I am going to live on the convictions of the reality of the moment. And in the moment, right now, I do not see the book of discipline changing. Yes?
I was going to make a comment, not to contradict you. There were some changes in 2019 to the book of discipline, but it went the other direction. It went much more conservative than even the bishops wanted. So the most recent changes to the book of discipline having anything to do with human sexuality have actually become stricter. There is still that difficulty of how to deal with the situation out toward California, but the book of discipline, if anything, changed more conservatively than even the bishops wanted in 2019.
That is true. And let me just say, while I can stand before you and say nobody can predict what changes will take place. These debates go on every 4 years or whenever they can have general conference. And they will continue. Some people will say they're tired of talking and hearing about this, and they would just want to move on and put all this behind us, and that's why they're leaving. My personal conviction is I'm not tired of talking. I'm not tired of being in conversation with my brothers and sisters in Christ who may have different ideas than my own. My faith compels me to remain in relationship with everyone, even if we disagree. Even if my brother doubts my salvation because I was not baptized by immersion. I don't stop loving him and having a conversation with him. We will continue to be brothers. You were wanting to say something, sir?
One thing on all this, to me, people are talking about this is the book of discipline says this, the book of discipline says that, and so on and so forth. People go against that, okay? You gave an example.
Yeah.
Okay, California is one. There's others besides California where they have that issue going on as well. However, the point to me, and this is not just a Methodist church. I grew up a Baptist. I've attended Assembly, Church of God. I've attended non-denomination. The point being, when are they going to stop just talking about it and do something about it? Because you've got to have church discipline. Paul pointed it out in the scripture. If you don't enforce church discipline, then there's no use in having that church discipline written out.
I agree with you that it's frustrating. And there are technical reasons. You know what I thought you were going to say? I thought you were going to say, why are we talking about the book of discipline? Why aren't we talking about the Bible? Because I hear that comment a lot. But our book of discipline,
That too.
yeah, Our book of discipline is our covenant that is our rules and structures. Just like, I'm going to use the example of our secular law. You know, there are times when a person is up for a trial, and everybody in the room knows they're guilty. But on a technicality, they get off. I mean, it happens, right? And I like to say, not everything that is legal is moral, and not everything that is technical, correct, in the book of discipline is biblical. I'd like to believe that much of the book of discipline is based on biblical values. And I'd like to believe, I know that our doctrines are. Some of these social principles are the things that are getting debated, and let me just differentiate between the social principles and the doctrines. The doctrines and the articles of religion will not be changed. Those are bedrock doctrines that are Orthodox and Christian, passed on from John Wesley, and they cannot be changed. The social principles, that stuff is going to be debated, and it's going to be modified whenever it can. One of my big concerns about conservatives leaving is the ability to keep traditional values in the book of discipline. I don't know what's going to happen in 2024, but I'm hopeful that a lot of traditional voices will still be there to defend the traditional values of the book of discipline. I just saw recently posted in Facebook, if you can believe everything you see on Facebook, but a letter from the bishops of Africa stating that they do not want to be in the Global Methodist Church or connected with the WCA, and they want to remain in the United Methodist Church. You may or may not know that it is the African contingent that is probably the most conservative, and they are a large contingent. And one reason why these conservative values remain in our book of discipline today is largely due to the conservative Africans and Asians that are the fastest growing areas of the Methodist Church. Evangelically, more people are coming to Christ in Africa and in Asia and the Philippines, in Korea and Philippines and Africa, than they are in America. And they now have more delegates than Americans do. And they're remaining in the United Methodist Church. And that gives me hope that traditional values will still be maintained in the book of discipline. Now, the reason why we are unable to hold the Western jurisdiction accountable is a technicality in the book of discipline that needs to be fixed. But it hasn't been fixed yet. And I'm going to tell you why that technicality exists. You're not going to like this answer. During the Civil War, the Methodist Church divided between North and South. There was a Methodist Episcopal Church North and a Methodist Episcopal Church South. And the issue was largely over slavery. So as you can imagine, the Southern Church was in favor of maintaining slavery, and the Northern Methodist Church was making proclamations that slavery was a sin. And the church split. In the 40s, after World War II, the church remained split for a long time until after World War II, and then it reunited. And it was during that conference of reunification that the Southerners who didn't trust those carpetbagging Northerners wanted to separate the church into jurisdictions. And they fixed it in the discipline that one jurisdiction couldn't tell another jurisdiction what to do in their corporal matters. And that fix that we Southerners put in keeps us now from being able to hold the Western jurisdiction accountable. Now, that's a technicality. It's a matter of the book of discipline, but it keeps one jurisdiction from holding another jurisdiction accountable. So they may do it in Ohio, they may do it in California, they may do it in New York, but our jurisdiction is not doing it, and our conference is not doing it, and we're holding to the values of the Book of Discipline. And we uphold the Book of Discipline in our conference. Yeah, Roger?
That's a good answer, and that explains a lot, but how can it be corrected? Because, are they trying to correct it? Because that is where it's kind of split us up right now. Up in there.
Every 4 years, we have a general conference. And this is the way I like to explain the structure of the Methodist Church. You may recall that John Wesley sent Thomas Coke and Francis Asbury to America to establish the Methodists in America. He remained initially a priest in the Church of England. But his action of basically setting Asbury and Coke apart to be the bishops of America sort of separated him from the Mother Church of England. They came to America and established the Methodist Church in 1784 with what they called the Christmas Conference in Baltimore, Maryland. What do you think about that date? 1784. The Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776. It wasn't until several years later, the Battle of 1812, that we finally really get rid of fighting with the British. We were organizing a government, and our government ancestors, forefathers, mothers, were wanting to establish a fair governmental structure that was balanced, that didn't have a monarchy. So we had an executive office and a president. We had really democratically elected representatives called congresspeople and senators, and we have a judicial branch. When we elect delegates to go to general conference or annual conference, we are mirroring our government by electing representatives to go and vote on laws that are being made. When they go every 4 years to work on the Book of Discipline, every modification, every change in the Book of Discipline is literally called legislation. And they go into groups to work out legislation in these groups before they agree and to bring it before the floor, just like our government works for pieces of legislation in committees before it ever comes to the floor of the conference, or in that case, Congress. Our structure is a direct mirror of the United States government. That's who we are. We elect representatives, and we wanted to make sure that there was a balanced representation so that there's an equal number of laity and clergy who help form the rules. So our delegates go, when they're elected by us, to be representatives, to vote on the laws and the rules. And just like in our government, we sometimes have two parties that sometimes can be very polarized. And sometimes you can see that polarization the best through regional areas. There tends to be more Republicans in Texas than in New York. I'm just saying. Okay? And you can see in these regional differences theological polarization also. But we are, in spite of the fact that the Global Methodist Church took on that moniker, we are actually, as the United Methodist Church, a very global church, with representatives and delegates being elected from all over the world. And equal representation based on the number of members they have. So the faster Africa grows and the more American church is in decline, the more delegates they get and the fewer delegates we get from the U.S. Because it's based on a percentage of the number of members we have. And that's one of the things that has been in play politically in our church. And one of the reasons why we always hear these debates is because we have people from all over the world and all over the U.S. with a whole wide range of opinions. Up until now, I shouldn't say this perfectly. The truth of the matter is, for my 44 years in ministry, there's oftentimes been times when I've had conversations around a cup of coffee with a number of my clergy friends, and I've said something like, well, I wish the book of discipline didn't say that. I wish it said this. And we've talked about and debated, the changes we would make if it were left up to us. It's the same kind of things that you might have when you talk with your friends about our government and the decisions they make in Austin or in Washington. We have these conversations. And there have been times when there have been things in the book of discipline that I've kind of disagreed with. And yet, because it's my denomination, I've always been willing to uphold it, to be faithful to it. I've said, you can debate it, you can discuss it, you can disagree with it, you just can't be disobedient to it. And that's been my value. I've debated it, I've discussed it, I've disagreed with parts of it, but I'm not disobedient to it. And that's the value that I hold as a district superintendent for all the pastors and all the churches in my district. And I believe that's what's held in our conference. Yes, sir.
Okay, that's correct. I like what you said. However, there are people in our hierarchy in Texas who do not support that point.
I don't disagree with that.
And that's where I'm talking about where the discipline needs to come in.
Yeah.
And it's not happening. And it's not happening just in the Methodist. It's not happening in the Methodist church. It's not happening in other churches. They're not holding to the biblical principles.
Doing the work of a district superintendent sometimes can be very hard. There have been moments when a pastor has misbehaved. And the serious question of whether or not we remove them from office or remove their credentials as a pastor comes up. Whenever those occur, we recognize that there's a due process, and everybody sort of gets their day in court, so to speak. Oftentimes, when the misbehavior is not so grievous, but it's serious, the bishop has the authority to have what he calls, drive home a just resolution. And in a just resolution, it's negotiated with all the parties, the complaining party and the party that's being complained about. And if everybody can come into agreement on this just resolution, for example, I just used a pastor has a drinking problem. And it's discovered. And there's witnesses. And they're saying that he cannot be effective in the church any longer because of this drinking problem. That's happened. The bishop may remove them and require them to be hospitalized, go through a 12-step program, through counseling, and go through some more psychological testing before they can return. And a general rule, most all people around there don't know anything about the requirements other than that pastor is gone and we're going to get a new pastor. But there is a due process, and those things are negotiated. And we hold people accountable for their actions. And I will just tell you that also as a district superintendent, thank God for me it hasn't happened in this district, but it has happened in our conference. We've had more problems with heterosexual pastors misbehaving than we have with any homosexual pastors. I've not had any grievance in our conference that I'm aware of because of a pastor's misbehavior as a homosexual person. There's been no complaints. There's been no action taken. We have had some who have not been faithful to the marriage covenant, and they've lost their credentials. So I know that there, and I want to say, we have very good, robust policies for training and rules that are very clear about sexual misconduct. There's not even a place for sexualized conversation, innuendo, jokes, bad language in the workplace. Nobody can flirt with another individual. If we get a complaint that that pastor said something that made me feel uncomfortable, and it may have just been a passing joke. In one case, one pastor just simply said to a young person, and this pastor said, I say this to everybody. I didn't mean anything to it, but some teenage girl had texted him something. He texted the answer back, and then he closed with, I love you. Grandmother sees the text and complains to the district superintendent. That pastor lost his appointment. We don't allow sexualized conversation of any kind, in our conference. And I've never had a complaint. Yes, ma'am.
I may be mistaken, but I believe that I've recently been told that there is wording in the discipline concerning homosexual appointments, pastors, things like that, as long as they're not saying that they're gay.
Well,
Is that correct?
that's not what it says. What it says is homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching. It says that in one place. And in another place it says, when it comes to defining the attributes for a pastor, because homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching, no self-avowed practicing homosexual may practice in United Methodist ministry. So it defines that a person has to be self-avowed practicing. Okay? Now, what does that mean? And how can that be interpreted? Well, what they, I can't speak for California. I can only speak for Texas, and where I'm on the cabinet, in the bishop's cabinet. If there were a complaint, I'll say this. If there were a complaint against a pastor, and somebody said, I know for a fact that they are gay. I've seen them. I have heard them admit it privately among their friends. That complaint would be taken seriously, and the due process would begin. But so it's sort of, you're sort of right, but you're sort of wrong, because I suppose, I'm just saying, I suppose that if a person had a sexual orientation that was attracted to someone of the same gender, but they never talked about it, they never acted on it, we also have celibacy and singleness and fidelity in marriage, so they remain celibate, but they happen to have a orientation, but they were in every other, they were moral. They were celibate. I suppose a pastor like that could be a United Methodist pastor in the Texas Annual Conference. And if you want to call that a loophole, it's a loophole, but I'd say they're not doing anybody any harm by not talking about it. I don't think a person should talk about their sexuality anyway. No pastor should, or their sexual behavior, even with their own spouses. I think that's a very private matter. And so whether you're homosexual or heterosexual, I don't think there's a place for that kind of conversation.
Well, I just think my brain was thinking more like somebody who, say you have two women who are living together, but if I'm not saying that I'm gay, then it's okay for me to be a preacher.
Well,
Because I'm not calling this person my wife or whatever, you know. I think that's
well,
more
you know,
where my
I
brain
guess,
was
you
going.
know, if I'm looking at that objectively,
Uh-huh.
two people of the same gender living together, and I don't really know them, but if I have no specific complaint, I can't act on it, number one. But number two, who's to say they're not just roommates, you know, with no sexualized behavior? Now, it would take a witness and a complaint to change that narrative. But with a witness and a complaint, we suddenly have a serious situation, okay? But if they're just living together and people suspect, but haven't really seen anything, they've not really talked about it, they're just, you know, they think maybe because they're two people living together, that's not enough to go on. And that wouldn't hold up in a court of law, that certainly wouldn't hold up in our courts. So that's kind of, you know, why I'm kind of, but I'm telling you, if we have a complaint, a formal complaint and witnesses, then it's enough to go to some kind of due process.
Can I ask one more question?
Sure.
Kind of a multiple question, but I've not heard really from anybody who is speaking for the UMC like you are or the GMC. What are the actual, I've heard there are deadlines for decisions to be made, for votes to be taken. What are those deadlines?
Okay. There are three deadlines. There is a provision in the Book of Discipline that was newly created, I guess, Don, 2019?
Yes, 2019, and look, yeah,
For 25.
paragraph 2553.
Yeah, paragraph 2553. And it stipulates that churches can disaffiliate, provided several reasons, but usually on the basis of objections over human sexuality. That provision has a sunset provision in it, and it is only good until the end of 2023. The writers or the framers of that legislation, I believe, put that date on it because they knew that there would be a new general conference in 2024. And they assumed that something different would replace it in 2024. But again, nobody can tell you what's going to happen in 2024. But that's why I believe it has that date. But anyway, it is good until the end of 2023. Some churches are in discernment now and are considering disaffiliating now because our bishop has, number one, announced that he is retiring January 1st. And he is willing to call a special session of a special annual conference for the purposes of considering churches that want to disaffiliate. And that called session of the annual conference will be this year, December 3rd. When any church that has gone through the proper procedures of discernment, has worked out all of the details, if there are more details, I'll explain some of those in a minute. And they can be properly before the conference for a vote. However, there's a lot of work that needs to be done to be properly before the conference on December 3rd. And a lot of paperwork. And a lot of deed work, because part of this provision is you meet these qualifications and you get the deeds to your property. Right now, all property.
Is that deadline the December 3rd
No, it's November 10th
of this year?
of this year.
So
You
we only have a
have
month to learn
to,
about
have to
it?
make the decision before November 10th to be properly before the annual conference on December 3rd.
And if you miss that deadline,
Then you have next annual conference and Memorial Day weekend of 2023, I believe. Now,
That you can still retain your property
that you
Be
can still
property.
disaffiliate,
and retain property.
yes. So, some churches are putting off discernment until the spring. Some are taking more time. Some are rushing to the November 10th deadline because they know our bishop is willing to do this now, and because we don't know who our next bishop will be, they're not going to risk it. So frankly, they're rushing to this deadline of November 10th. So it takes, in order to disaffiliate, it takes a vote of all the full members, professing members of your church that are present and voting. Only members can vote. It takes a 2/3 majority of those present and voting with a resolution to disaffiliate. And you have to meet, I have to conduct that meeting. The district superintendent conducts the vote for disaffiliation with a written ballot. All memberships is verified in the meeting. And you have to meet a few other requirements. One of them is there is a cost for disaffiliation. Basically, the way the bishop says, you have to pay your bills before you leave town. Pay up on your apportionments. Last year's apportionments and this year's apportionments. There was a piece called the unfunded pension liability, but right now that is zero. That has to do with the pensions of people that are still grounded. Needs to be covered, but right now it's covered. So under the current provisions. Don, you were telling me that we got the numbers for Brazoria earlier. It was around.
The numbers are right at $5,000. I'm excuse the fact that I won't quote the pennies correctly, probably.
Just under 5,000.
I believe the number is $4,949 and change.
Okay, so just under $5,000 is the remainder balance of your apportionments, probably for this year, probably paid last year. Some churches didn't pay last year's apportionments, and the rules are the previous year's apportionments and this year's apportionments have to be paid in full for the entire year. In your case, so every church has a different number. In your case, your number is just short of $5,000. So you can disaffiliate and be properly before the annual conference on December 3rd. If you have voted as a church conference with a 2/3 majority or greater, and you sign there's a bunch of paperwork to sign. And that, along with your check for just under $5,000, goes into the conference office, and then you are properly before the annual conference to disaffiliate.
And the trust clause
Is released. The trust,
up until next year.
January 1st. The effective date for those who are voted on December 3rd will be January 1st.
You were saying you could disaffiliate into 2023.
No. If you go before the annual conference this year, the disciplinary provision is good to the end of 2023. There's an opportunity to disaffiliate, but the timeline for anyone who's voted on at this December 3rd will all say official December 31st, 2022. On January 1st, 2023, you will be released from the United Methodist Church and disaffiliated.
And the trust clause.
And the trust clause as well. The deeds will be signed over to you.
But that won't happen after that, right?
It could happen anytime in 2023 if you go through the same thing. You have a church conference, 2/3 majority, pay the unfunded liability for the previous year, the current year, and you come before the annual conference in June 1st or whenever it will be, June 1st or 2nd of 2023. We'll have another annual conference. And we're trusting and believing that our next bishop will do that. But we don't know. We don't have an absolute, we don't know who our new bishop's going to be.
So it's not absolute that the trust clause, new bishop will.
We believe that the new bishop will respect our conference rules and the book of discipline, And when we elect a new bishop, we're going to be asking that question: are you willing to support our conference provisions on this? And we're going to be looking for a bishop that will. But that's all I can say.
For most people that are voting, do you think?
I'm sorry, what?
Will that be a deciding factor for most of whoever decides who the new bishop will be? Do you think that will weigh heavy on their decision?
Yeah. Let me explain how bishops are assigned for just a moment.
Please do.
In November, like the second week of November, we're having here in Houston, Texas, a jurisdictional conference. There have been delegates that have been elected to jurisdictional conference. It includes all of our general conference delegates and all of our jurisdictional conference. Every conference has within it what they call a jurisdictional episcopal committee. So our conference has some of its delegates to serve on this committee. And right now, that committee is collecting information from leaders of our conference about, they're asking, what kind of bishop do we want? And that committee is going to represent us after the bishops are elected. There's another committee called the Jurisdictional Episcopal Committee that is the actual Jurisdictional Episcopal Committee. It's made up of two delegates from every conference in our jurisdiction. Those two delegates will be going in there, and of those bishops that are available to be assigned, they'll be advocating, asking the committee to assign the bishop that is in alignment with our values. You have to trust the process. You have to trust that the representatives will represent our conference. I believe they will. I know who they are. I think actually Chap Temple, who's going to be with you next week, is one of them. He is on the Jurisdictional Episcopal Committee along with Don House, a layperson from A&M College Station in the United Methodist Church. And they will be advocating for an assignment of a bishop that is in line. That committee has already met with several groups. I've already been before those groups because they want to interview the cabinet. Who do you want to work for? Who do you want to work with? What are qualities you're looking for? So they ask all these questions of us, and they're gathering this information. They're asking other people all over the conference. So they're gathering the information, and we're in hopes, and I feel relatively confident that we'll get a bishop that is in alignment. When I say in alignment, somebody who understands and gets the Texas Annual Conference, what our values are, what we stand for, and would be willing to serve us and not be in conflict with us, but rather help us become the very best conference we can be. So I feel confident that we'll get a good bishop. Plus, right now, we're the biggest conference in our jurisdiction, and we have a lot of influence and a lot of weight. So, yes, ma'am.
Do we need to vote to be in discernment for at least 40 days before we can take the next step?
We have it's funny how these things work. What the book of discipline said is after a period of discernment approved by the district superintendent. That's what the book is. So our bishop turned to the district superintendent and says, what do y'all think discernment looks like? And I and two other district superintendents wrote this 3-page document that said a period of discernment for all churches, and the cabinet adopted it. And in it, we chose the number 40 days because, for one, we thought 40 days sounded biblical. As, Jesus was in the desert for 40 days, the ark, 40 days. There's a lot of 40s in the Bible, and it seemed like what it really means is it was the right amount of time. If you came under 38 days or 37 days, and I felt that you had done significant discernment, I would allow you to have the church conference. I'm not going to hold the 40-day as a technical. In fact, this is a recommendation of a suggestion, and we actually, in the discernment stuff, we said, you could do things like this. You should ask questions like these. We didn't say you have to do every one of these things and ask every one of these questions. We were just giving that as suggestions, and we know that a small church might go through discernment rather quickly. We're a very large church of 3,000 members, involving a lot of people. It might take a little bit longer. Every church is different. You could probably say to me as a congregation, golly, we've been talking about this sort of thing for years. We know what we want to do. We've been in discernment already. Just because we officially began at this date doesn't mean that we didn't start thinking about this at that date. I probably accept that. So, I'll work with you. You can work with me on that. Now, are any of you from a church outside of this district?
I'm sorry?
Any here from a church outside of this district? I see Nancy up here now. So, I'm telling you, I'm speaking as your district superintendent. I can't speak for any other district superintendent if you happen to be but on that matter. But I'm telling you that I will work with you. If you say you're scheduled a church conference and it hasn't been quite 40 days, but you think your period of discernment has been sufficient and you're ready to vote, I probably allow it. Don, are you going to ask a question?
Actually, I'm not. I'm going to ask one, since we brought up paragraph 2553 at this point. I have a question from Zoom, and I'm going to have to translate it slightly, but basically what it has to do with is, and give a little bit of background, because the question is asked sort of rhetorically to everybody here, not just to Tony. So I want to make sure I'm going to give you the answer to.
So it's a question, that's a statement.
Well, this is a question, and I'm going to do it justice. The question is based on paragraph 1 of discipline paragraph 2553, which is entitled Disaffiliation of a Local Church over Issues Related to Human Sexuality. Please, I didn't mean that. And it just says, because of the deep conflict within the United Methodist Church around issues of human sexuality, a local church shall have a limited right under the provisions of this paragraph to disaffiliate from the denomination for reasons of conscience regarding a change in the requirements and provisions of the Book of Discipline related to the practice of homosexuality. I'm going to abbreviate here: ordination, marriage, and so forth, as resolved and adopted by 2019 General Conference, or the actions and inactions of one's own annual conference related to those issues. And this is from Arun Welch. I hope I wanted to give you the background because he was basing it off reading that, so y'all don't have it in front of you. First off, are y'all clear on what I hopefully just read to you? Did y'all have a right conscience over what happened in 2019 about, and that is available online if you want to read what they did in 2019, or about what the Texas conference did or didn't. Here's what I'm quoting Arun Welch to everyone. Quote, "This is a question for those members of BUMC who wish to move. The pathway for disaffiliation that I just read to you requires," and he says, "an articulation of the disagreement." You don't actually have to say what your disagreement is, but that it is based on, not just because I feel like leaving, but because you have, to use a Vietnam word, a conscientious objection to what the General Conference did, or to what your conference did or didn't do. So I'm just making that clear. So basically asking, what is it that we disagree with? He said, "I would expect that in any vote to disaffiliate, that those differences are clearly expressed in the voting language, and also how those are addressed by the GMC." So it is a bit of a question rhetorically. It's also a bit of a statement. So I'm just doing justice to the question.
I think I understand the question, and I'm going to just... he sort of is asking, okay, what is your conscientious objection to the Book of Discipline. And in fact, the Book of Discipline has not changed, right? It still says homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching. And a lot of people have asked this kind of question. It goes back to what we were talking about, what Roger and a few others were mentioning earlier. We've allowed for the answer to be, we object on the basis of our inability to hold accountable those who are disobedient to the Book of Discipline on these matters. And so I just gave you the answer that we're allowing, but we don't ask that that necessarily be written in your resolution. The resolution just simply needs to say, after a period of discernment, we resolve to disaffiliate from the United Methodist Church in accordance with paragraph 2553. Actually, that's all you need to say in that resolution. Some resolutions I've seen also included, and we further resolve to affiliate with the Global Methodist Church, except its books of doctrine and disciplines. So it can be one resolution that includes the affiliation, or it can be two separate ones. The resolution to disaffiliate requires a 2/3 majority vote. The affiliation question really only requires a simple majority. Now let me speak to the 2/3. Does that answer the question? Sort of. Basically, my answer is...
I'm waiting for the feedback. I don't know.
Okay. My answer is we are allowing the consideration of disaffiliation based on the disobedience that has occurred over the matters of human sexuality across the nation, and not just within our conference. And the inaction at 2019 to be able to stop that disobedience. So it was that are being mentioned as reasons of conscience. So
He said that answered the question.
okay. I wanted to speak to the 2/3 majority piece for just a moment. Before I became a district superintendent, I was a pastor at Clear Lake United Methodist Church. It's a 3,000 plus member church. We had 1,000 in worship on Sundays. The person I followed was a guy named Morris Mathis. He was there for 6 years. I was pastor at Clear Lake for 10 years. But Morris followed somebody that was there for only 2 years. In their 2 years of ministry there, the church was overgrown. It had a space problem. It didn't have parking. It needed a bigger room for the contemporary service. It was busting out the seams. We'd already added 2 services. It was, we were having to take golf carts over to the park 3 blocks away and get people to come to church. While this other pastor, 2 pastors before me, was serving there, a church in town that was an existing church had built a new church, a mega church on the highway. And the church that they were leaving was much larger and had much greater parking than Clear Lake Methodist Church. It was not very far from the church. It was a community church. It was a big church, but it was a big church that was getting bigger. And they were selling that church for pennies on the dollar. You couldn't build a church that big with that much property for anything close to what they were willing to sell it to Clear Lake Methodist Church for. There were a lot of people who argued over whether or not they wanted to leave their existing church and move into that Baptist church. It was bigger. It was a good price. But they were leaving the place where they had been married and they had their baptisms and their funerals and significant experiences. They just didn't, the church was divided. They had a church conference and they voted, and it passed. 51% in favor of going, buying the new church, 49% against. So it passed. So they're going to start a capital campaign to raise the money. Never raised the money. And the church got deeper and deeper in conflict within itself. That pastor I said was there for only 2 years. The people wanted him out of there. They won the vote, but they lost the war. The church was in steep decline over the conflict. And a simple majority doesn't win when you're that divided. By the time I got there, an adjacent apartment complex came on the market for sale for $6 million. It was already $2 million more than the property that we could have bought. But it was right next door. We were on 5 acres. That was 5-acre apartment complex. People were living in it, but it was for sale. And we negotiated a price with a commercial real estate broker. We were going to put it up to the church to vote on. I had decided in advance, we're not going to vote on this and be a simple majority. If we're going to do this, it's got to be a super majority. We want 2/3. If the whole church isn't wanting to do it, we're not going to do it, or a good significant portion. So the 2/3 majority was what it was going to take to decide if we wanted to buy that apartment complex. I'm glad to say it was 90%. The vote was, and we bought that apartment complex. And then we also, on top of that, built a building. We were in $11 million worth of debt within my first year of ministry there. It was a big church, they paid for it. But we actually had a capital campaign 4 years later to reduce the debt. And again, I said, we're going to have a 2/3 majority. I wanted a super majority to make sure that the congregation was solidly behind the decision. The rule of a 2/3 majority is a gift from the General Conference to you, to have a strong majority before you decide to leave. Sadly, there has been one church in our conference so far that had a vote not too very long ago over disaffiliation, and it failed because 2/3 majority is basically 67%. I count the number of ballots and I multiply it times 0.67, and that's how many it's got to have. They had 58% in favor of disaffiliating and 42% against, and the motion failed. That church is in deep, deep conflict. Somebody told me today, it's on Facebook now, that they've announced that they're starting a new Global Methodist church in that community with those 58% people, and they're splitting the church. Yes, ma'am.
Is that 2/3 of the entire congregation, the membership, or those who are at the meeting?
Present and voting.
Okay.
Present and voting. So I actually,
Members.
members present and
And
voting.
professing members at that.
Yeah, so, okay, so here's technically what I've done. I've had 2 of these meetings so far. I'm going to have 10 more, maybe. Already a couple of churches have said we're not going to vote. But I had 15 at first. I have 53 churches. I have 15 that were in discernment. I already have 2 that said we're not even going to vote. Just take us off the list. And a couple of others are. And I've had 1 vote against disaffiliation. It was a church not too very far from here. It was 42% wanted to disaffiliate. 58% voted against it, so it failed. But I did have another church that voted to disaffiliate. But in both of those cases, we had somebody at a table in the narthex verifying membership on a membership roll. And they signed it on a sign-in sheet, and they got a ballot. It was a written ballot. I resolved to disaffiliate with the United Methodist Church. Yes or no. That's the only options. And I take the number of ballots and I multiply it times 0.67. So if I had to have 68, and I only had 48, I knew it failed. So that's kind of what we do. We verify membership, we count the ballots, it's actually ballots recorded. If someone comes in and they choose to abstain and they don't turn in a ballot, it is not counted. It's not a part of the math. Okay? That's the way I run the meetings. That's, other BSs may run it differently, but that's fine. Does that answer your question? Yes, ma'am.
Okay, if
if we vote to go with the global, and we miss our deadlines of November and December, and we decide to do it in June, which is annual conference.
You need to do it before June. We haven't set what the deadline would be, but it would probably be early May.
Right, okay, and we meet that criteria. Would we only owe 50% of the apportionment?
No, you'll owe it the entire
The
year.
entire year?
This entire year plus next entire
Well,
year.
this is the year's pay, almost pay, so that's right. So it wouldn't be prorated.
No, it's just the year of annual call. Not just annual call, but your portions. Conference office figures out that number. They've already figured out your number. If you were to disability this year, as Don stated earlier, it's just under $5,000 that you pay. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I know Faith Bridge, my daughter belongs there, is devoted to disaffiliate.
Yes.
That's, I don't know, 6,000 members?
Yes,
Has the Woodlands also?
yes.
That's a bigger church, I don't know,
Yeah.
14,
Yeah, Faith Bridge is up with like almost 100%, and Woodlands is a high percentage. Those are the two largest churches so far. Now, before you think the world is going to leave, let me just give some balance to that perception. Some of our biggest and strongest churches in the city of Houston are not leaving. And I'm talking St. Paul's, St. Luke's, Chapelwood, Memorial Drive. Here in my district, St. Peter's, Katy, they're not even going to have a vote. I've had the church out in Sealy recently tell me that they're not going to have a vote. So, as I indicated earlier, I have 53 churches in this district. I think about 15 have officially begun discernment here in that count. 2 of them have already told me they're not going to have a vote. And so far we've had 1 vote for disaffiliation and 1 vote against disaffiliation. So I do not see a large number of churches in the Southwest District leaving. Now, having said that, let me just also say, I am treating every church, every person with grace. And if a church decides to disaffiliate, I will make sure we follow the rules. I will help you follow the rules, and we'll allow that to happen. And we will say at the end of the vote, we love you. We're praying for you. I invite you to pray for me. I'm going to be working for the future of the United Methodist Church and the witness of the United Methodist Church in the future. And I will just tell you, one of the things I'm going to be doing for the months remaining me as the superintendent is looking over my district, and I'll just use the Woodlands as an example. Woodlands is a big community, and there are some large Methodist churches in the Woodlands that are leaving. You know, one of the first things we're going to be doing is figure out a way to start a new United Methodist Church in the Woodlands for those persons who wanted to remain in the United Methodist Church but their churches left, and for other persons who want to affiliate with a church like the United Methodist Church. And I'll be looking over this district and seeing where, I'm going to use this phrase, United Methodist deserts are. And we'll be working hard to establish new faith communities wherever they are needed, whether that's in Brazoria or, Columbia or someplace nearby, I don't know. But if we have a big hole down here, we're going to start a new church because we want to continue the United Methodist witness throughout the conference effectively. We'll be there for United people. We've already gotten calls from people whose churches have decided to leave, but they wanted to remain the United Methodist Church. And if that's the case, we're going to help them find the United Methodist Church. I'm going to be working for the future faithfulness and effectiveness and witness for the United Methodist Church in the future. Not in competition, but recognizing that these are two denominations are distinctly different. And I think the world of tomorrow probably needs an effective United Methodist witness and has room for another Wesleyan movement witness like the Global Methodist Church. We need both. You have to decide if you want to be a United Methodist and be a part of this strong connection or not. I mean, you say, I don't know what Don will do, but I'm going to throw this out as a hypothetical. If you vote to disaffiliate, and Don says to me, I want to remain a United Methodist pastor, I will be working hard to find Don a new appointment, and I will not be working for Brazoria, right? Because I am not a district superintendent or a presiding elder in the Global Methodist Church. You're on your own. That represents to me the strength of the connection and something that you need to think about before rushing out the door, if that's what you're thinking. But that's not a threat. I'm just putting the facts on the table that the connection is here for you as long as you remain a United Methodist, but we're not available to people to churches in other denominations. Now, for the period between January 1st and July 1st, we'll likely have several of these situations where we have churches that have decided to leave and pastors who have want to remain United Methodist, and vice versa. We're going to have some churches who have decided to remain as United Methodists, but the pastor wanted to go Global Methodist Church. And for those 6 months between January 1 and July 1, we're going to probably have cross-denominational appointments. We have a provision in our Book of Discipline where we can appoint a Methodist pastor into another denomination, and vice versa. We have other people from other denominations who serve churches in our conference. And so we'll probably enact those kind of provisions as a kind of transition period for the 6 months of next year. But January 1st, not necessarily. So we'll be working hard to fix it wherever we can, as soon as we can. Some of those we might have an opportunity to fix January 1st, but probably not. We'll be scrambling next spring to fix all the rest if there's a large number of churches that actually disaffiliate and their pastors don't disaffiliate with them. Now, truthfully, and I'm just making this up, I don't have any facts to this, but my sense is most of the churches that are disaffiliating, their pastors are helping that happen, and they'll probably go with them. So that's not my headache. My headache is when I have a pastor who's a United Methodist pastor whose church is disaffiliated, and I got to find them an appointment. Or a United Methodist church whose pastor has decided to go join the Global Methodist Church, and they're pastorless, and I got to find them a pastor. So we'll be taking this spring to fix some of those things. That's my problem. That's not yours. But, it would be your problem if you were going for any length of time without a pastor. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. If we decide to disaffiliate and then in a few years decide it's not for us and want to come back, what happens?
We've asked that question among ourselves, and we're having that discussion. One technical answer is, the discipline doesn't really have a provision for that. I mean, it's never been asked before. We've never had to ask it before. So there's not been anything written as a pathway back. And yeah, some of us can remember when certain sort of, especially in rural settings, small, non-denominational church has been meeting, and they want to be a United Methodist church. And, we just simply, visit with them, help them understand the Book of Discipline and the way we make appointments and apportionments and all of the responsibilities and benefits that come along with our connection. And in most cases, we probably, have them sign a piece of paper that says they agree to adhere to the Book of Discipline. its provisions and will accept the United Methodist pastor as appointed there, they probably will sign that covenant and allow for them to come back. Yes, Don?
The only possible fly in that ointment, not that you're putting in competing churches, but if you already have this, you've established a new church plant that's UMC, then more or less proximal to that, then it could be a little complicated, I suppose.
It could get complicated in terms of location if there's two. But you know, years ago when the EUBs and the Methodists merged, we had a lot of situations where EUB churches were almost across the street from the Methodist churches, especially in the Midwest. So, you know, those things were worked through, but it's hard for me to imagine, you know, that we wouldn't want to work with the congregation in one way or another. And, you know, there's more than one way to skin a cat. I mean, we could figure out a way to find a United Methodist church for a church to be a part of, people to be a part of that want to be a United Methodist, or help them reestablish themselves as United Methodists. We don't really have a provision for it, but we are people of grace, and we've managed to work with people from any walk of life, regardless of their past, to find a way back to the fold. And I'm sure we'll do it. It's a little bit more complicated for a pastor who has surrendered their credentials to leave, to go to another denomination, and then wants to come back. It's not impossible. In fact, somebody was welcomed back recently after being away in another denomination for a while. But they do have to go through some things. And again, they have to agree that they want to be a United Methodist pastor. And they may have to be in a year of probation and, you know, be under appointment and appear before the board of ministry and have some other things. But it's possible. It's just more complicated. Any others? Was that a hand in the back? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm still back to I think for one thing, we need more transparency. I think for another thing, we should be included on who we're appointed as our DS and bishops and things as the conference. You know, I think that we should be included in that. I know it would be complicated, but it could be done. And I'm back to the whole, that you don't know of any gay or lesbian ministers in the Texas conference, but you do in California and Colorado. It's going to get to Texas. It may not be here yet. So, are you going to be able to stand there and tell me that you will never, at any point, send a gay minister or lesbian pastor to this church, or any church in your conference?
Well, yeah. I mean, what I will say is we will always uphold the Book of Discipline in our conference. And the provisions in the Book of Discipline do not allow us to appoint any gay person. So I can clearly and honestly say we'll be upholding the Book of Discipline, and we won't be appointing a gay person to the church. But secondly, and it's kind of a follow-up to, I think what you're putting, whenever there's a pastoral change of any kind, retirement, or your pastor's moving to another church, the first thing I do is come to your church leadership, visit with your board, and I announce that your pastor's leaving, and I begin to develop a profile of the kind of pastor that you want. My job is to help find that person that has the gifts and the graces that align to your church's values. I know as a district superintendent that the last thing I would be doing is to appoint a pastor who, the moment they show up in your church, is going to be in conflict with you all because of who they are, what they stand for, where they come from, or anything else. That's not a successful pastor. That's going to be a pastor filled with conflict. No self-respecting district superintendent or bishop who knows their hat from the holy ground would ever want to appoint a pastor to your church that doesn't have a chance of being effective here and successful here, and that aligns with the values that you have reflected in your profile that you've given us. We work really hard. Now, I'll be honest. For smaller churches, sometimes the bench is kind of short. What I mean by that is, larger churches have much larger salaries. And once a pastor graduates from seminary, there's a minimum salary that they can receive. Your salary here is just a little bit over that minimum. So the margin of how many people coming out of seminary are coming from a similar church where this would be a raise or a nice level move because they were ready to move and try a new challenge. And instead of having 12 people that want to come to Brazoria, I might have only 3 or 4. But here's the question I have for you, and it's not put down at the Global Methodist Church. It's just, I really don't know the answer. But how many people does the Global Methodist Church have on their pool? All of the pastors that they're going to have that are going from the Global Methodist Church, from the Methodist Church into the Global Methodist Church, is all the pastors you're going to have. The answer is 0. And so, I'm concerned about some of the small churches. And you will, and let me just say, according to the provisional book of doctrines and disciplines, you can only have a Global Methodist Church pastor serving a Global Methodist Church. You can't just go out and get somebody's cousin who's a Methodist preacher and you think they're a pretty good guy or girl. You got to get a Global Methodist pastor. So you don't have total independence to find them. You got to find somebody within the denomination. So just be careful. We can deploy pastors and we can find pastors, but I can promise you that we will always appoint a pastor that it will be our highest hopes and ideals that will meet the needs of this congregation and be in alignment with your values.
It's my understanding there won't be licensed local pastors in GMC.
That's what I hear too. I've read I haven't studied. I've looked through the transitional book of doctrines and disciplines, and it appears that they are eliminating the license of local pastor, and they're having an ordination only. I don't know what those requirements are. I don't.
And that would be subject to change too when they have their first general conference or whatnot. So
They'll have the first general conference, called general conference next year, I think.
right. So it could change over time.
Yeah. They'll meet and modify their book of discipline just like we do on a regular basis. Yes, sir.
I'd like to thank you. I think you did a great job answering my question and the questions over. And we appreciate you coming here to try to explain to us what is happening.
Now next week you're going to hear from Chap Temple. He has been a leader in the Global Methodist Church. I love him to death. He's been a lifelong friend. He and I kind of don't see eye to eye on these things, and he's going to tell you some things that sound different than me. And unfortunately, he gets the second word. It's always the one you heard last, that has the most impressive memory. But I do think he will approach this with integrity and honesty. He'll tell you why he loves the Global Methodist Church and why he's been working so hard for it. I respect him and I always will. He's one of the brilliant minds. In fact, I think he's had a hand in helping write the new book of discipline, the transition book of doctrine and discipline for the Global Methodist Church. Thank you all, friends. It's coming late. I've got a long drive to get back home. So I thank you all for your attention tonight. It's been a great time. You've been very graceful. I appreciate your honesty, your good questions.
Thanks for Tony for being here. I wanted to also say questions going once, going twice.
We'll have more next week.
That's fine, that's what,
I have a
and
question. May we ask more questions of the DS as they come up?
Yes, let me just say, if any of you, two things. Any of you can call, text, or email me. If you don't know my email address, get it from Don, and I'll do my best to respond.
And if you don't have a cell phone number, I do.
Okay, yeah, you can have a you can call me. Now, I will tell you,
Well, they can text you.
if I'm in a meeting, if I have a pastor in my office and he and I or she and I are having a conversation, I don't answer my phone. I wait till my conversation is over and then I'll look and see. So if you calling me is important, leave a voicemail. I'll return the call at my earliest convenience. But secondly, on the conference website, the Texas Annual Conference website, under the Navigating the Waters, there's a section called FAQ, and there's probably over 300 questions that have been asked by people all across this conference, and those answers are there. And I want to encourage you to look through those questions and answers. They could very well answer the questions that you have better even than I. But a lot of facts are on that website. If you have access to a computer and a website, go to the Texas Annual Conference website, Navigating the Waters. There's tons of information there about discernment, about disaffiliation, and this FAQ section. And they'll answer 90% of your questions. But that's not to say that I'll make myself available to answer any other additional questions you have.
all right, then Tony, you want to close us in prayer? Sure.
I have a special
Yes.
request for prayer, I'm sorry.
Yes.
A young member of our family has a brain tumor, and he's like a 3-year-old, and he's having brain surgery in the morning, and I would just like everybody to pray for his name is Trevor Gillen.
What's his name
Trevor
again?
Gillen.
Trevor
Trevor
Trevor?
Gillen.
Dibblin.
Let's pray. Oh God, first and foremost, we want to lift up to you, Trevor, who's heavy on our hearts tonight. We pray, oh God, for you to be in the hands of the surgeons and the medical team that will treat him in his recovery in the days ahead. We're thankful, oh God, that we live in a day and age where medicine has so many advances and can do so much. We pray that you will work through those advances for Trevor's good. And yet we also know, oh God, that ultimately we depend on you for healing and wholeness and hope, for your presence and your all-sufficient grace to see us through these difficult times. Come not only in the surgeon's hand, oh God, but in alongside his family who surround him with their love and their attention and care. And make your presence known to them. May they always know of your never-ending love and all-sufficient grace. Now, God, we pray your blessings upon all of us gathered here as we go from this place. Lead us back into our other places of serving you. Help us to be bold in our witness of your great love in Jesus Christ to a hurting, broken world. Unashamed of the gospel of which you have called us to be a part. Bless this church and its many ministries. May it grow and flourish in the days ahead, regardless of which path you lead it down. May they be faithful to you and their calls to go out into the world and make disciples. You do that. We see the fruits of their labors and in the handiwork of your power of your Holy Spirit. We'll be quick to offer you all the glory and all the praise for all that you're doing in our lives. We pray these things in Christ's our Lord's name. Amen.
I gotta figure it out. Huh? Now you gotta figure it out. No, I don't do that.
You're seeing me on the prayer list, but I'll call him out first.
I gotta tell you, the ladies don't miss
So now you're
Hey, Roger. Here's Ron, good questions. He's mischievous. You have to watch him.
Well, that's good.
Come in. How are you? I'm in the back.
You're in the back?
I'm in the back.
You want me to lock the door? You got a key?
I'm gonna give you the things I have for children. Okay, let me get it. You did say you're the one that.
We had a lockdown. Oh, I guess she did. We've been having stressful days. They had a shooting, or they thought there was a shooting behind.
I'm gonna go back there and get some things that I found.
Oh, you just need help carrying them? Okay. Well, no, I'll go quickly, but I can't stay too long, because I do want to go home and actually eat dinner before I go to bed. And I had to change out the battery charger. But it's working out, so. I restarted it. It finally came on. And so I just went and had the battery charger. You know, everything we have going on, I have. Yeah, we didn't get any text from HSE, we didn't get any phone calls. I was only getting stuff on the internet. They were finding out from their stations and their bus drivers. I made sure the bus drivers came out this morning. Yeah, I'm done with this. I need to go I don't have the tractor on my farm, we can ball green all the way. I should have packed some coffee, because I'm only sleeping for midnight till 3, so I can handle my mother and everything John's not handling. He's handling his mom's stuff. That's what I was thinking, is this stuff.
Hey, thank you, I'm sorry I pushed you through
Maybe one of these days I'll be over now.
It's nice meeting you. Have a good night.
It's just 4 times too big for me the way it is.
We have rooms. And Wendy can't give your daughter something without giving your son something. He'll be so happy. She says, it's just not fair. She's not right. No. Oh, she will love this. I hope so. Oh, yeah, she will love this.
you? Oh, boy.
And I never get into gear, so I think I'm
Well,
good
you
now.
start running on that.
You're going, no.
Did you want to go and yank her out of public school
Last year.
immediately and say, no, we are homeschooling?
But I said the agency and all this, with the agreement that I could stay till I'm ready to retire. Which is a good thing.
I mean, there's all
I
there.
had the same forms. You were with Weston, I'm sorry to hear that. Now you had to go with, did you go to
Does she
Texas?
have to go? Or are you just giving her the option?
So last time we went to,
Uh-huh.
and we only got through about a quarter of the curriculum.
Did
So
church
she didn't finish kindergarten last year. I think she
Corey Higgins.
That's all the people.
Well, they have
I
other.
know for sure she's ADHD.
So they should already.
Put her on medication.
Well, they are, that's right, I think they'll say that, but
She's been in.
there's just one year.
Right, and
And
that's
that's
basically
basically
people that we
discipline
have sent
write-ups
over
and
to other agencies
counseling
from
and all
Weston.
That's good, guys.
And now they're
That
not,
is
yeah, they don't have their.
Or I could pay 10 grand with
So they
insurance
can
to
get
go to
insurance.
private.
Part on the side of
And you can do it.
No, good.
Yeah, so it's the insurance loophole to make your kid go to public school and for the state to pay for
But
it.
yeah, so I'm waiting for those people to come back and say, now
We're
we're
gonna do a 1 year kindergarten. And at this point, she's already behind, and she's 3 weeks in between being sick and acting out and everything else. But I have to have all this documentation.
But she needs the nan to go sit with her in class, because I can do that, and I can promise you she will be so anywhere, and she'll be like, I'll be good, I promise, Mom, please let her come back.
Her teacher is so good though. Her teacher is like, she needs this. This is all she needs is medicine and counseling. And we're gonna get it. But we just have to have the write-ups, then we have to have the discipline.
Jane, thanks for being here.
We have to have the paperwork. We're gonna get this all around Christmas, but for the next 3 months, she's gonna be behind in school. She's gonna get.
That's good. And that takes away all of her confidence
Exactly.
and everything else.
So that's why I kept her in dance, even though it's killing me to drive her to spring and stay in dance from 6 to 9.